The Eastern Front was quiet that morning. Too quiet. Soldiers know that kind of silence. It's the sound of something terrible waiting to happen. Beneath the frost and smoke, one man walked alone through the wreckage, unaware that 6 enemies were watching him from the shadows. What followed would become one of the most improbable fights of the war. The morning light crept slowly over the battlefield, a pale sun struggling to pierce the fog. Smoke curled upward in fragile spirals, mixing with the frost that clung to the wrecked earth. The air smelled of gunpowder and frozen mud, an odor that had long replaced the scent of life. Broken trees stood like monuments to everything that had fallen, their charred limbs pointing accusingly toward the gray sky. Through this desolation, one man moved, a Ukrainian scout, exhausted, cold, and alone. His team had vanished during the night, swallowed by darkness and chaos. The radio had gone silent hours ago. The last thing he remembered was the echo of gunfire and the desperate cries of his comrades before the line went dead. Now only he remained. Every step he took crunched faintly in the frozen dirt. Every breath came out as a small white ghost. His rifle was clutched tight against his chest, his eyes scanning every shadow, every movement of mist. He had survived too many ambushes to trust quiet mornings. In war, silence is never safety. It's a warning. Somewhere ahead, in a narrow trench carved like an open wound across the field, 6 Russian soldiers waited. They had seen a flicker of motion earlier, a lone figure slipping between the trees. They whispered quietly, steadying their rifles, certain that whoever approached would not leave that field alive. 6 against 1, they didn't see a man, they saw a target. The Ukrainian moved closer, unaware of the trap tightening around him. His instincts were sharp, honed by months of fighting. But even instincts can't always pierce through fog and fear. He paused for a second, eyes narrowing as he scanned the tree line. Something felt off. The world was too still, no birds, no wind, just the faint hum of tension in the air. Then, the world exploded. A flash, a roar, the tearing scream of bullets ripping through trees. The Russian rifles thundered at once, bark splintering, dirt erupting in small geysers around him. He dove for cover, rolling behind a shattered log as a storm of lead tore the earth apart. For a moment, it seemed over. 6 rifles against 1 man, no chance. But he wasn't dead, not yet. He steadied his breath, waited for the barrage to falter, then swung his rifle around. 3 short bursts, precise, controlled. The sound echoed like punctuation marks against chaos. 1 Russian ducked too slow. He fell. Another cursed, ducking back, splinters flying around him. 3rd appeared dead. The soldier moved again, shifting position through the smoke. He knew he couldn't stay still. 1 second too long in the open and it would end. But he didn't think about dying. He thought about surviving, about completing the mission. Grenades rolled through the mud, exploding in clouds of fire and soil. The concussion hit him like a wave, but he kept moving, crawling, firing, breathing. He had become something else entirely, an instinct wrapped in a uniform. Every motion measured, every thought replaced by pure will. In the trench, panic began to spread. The Russians had expected an easy kill. Instead, their prey had teeth. "Flank him!" their leader shouted. 2 soldiers climbed out of the trench, trying to move along the side. But the Ukrainian had already seen their shadows through the mist. He squeezed the trigger twice. 2 echoes, 2 bodies hitting the ground. Now it was 4 against 1. The balance had shifted. Fear crept into their voices. The Russian commander barked orders, but hesitation had already set in. The Ukrainian used that moment. When a grenade came rolling toward him, he didn't freeze, he reacted. He caught it mid-roll and hurled it back into the trench. A deafening blast followed, shaking the earth. Smoke billowed upward, thick and gray, masking everything. Using the chaos as cover, he advanced. His boots slipped in mud, his breath sharp in his lungs. He fired through the smoke. 3 more bursts, 1 hit its mark. Another Russian fell. The last 2 survivors scrambled deeper into the trench, shouting to each other through the haze. The Ukrainian paused, reloading, his gloved hands trembling from adrenaline. He wiped the mud from his face and listened. Their voices were close, too close. He pulled a smoke grenade from his belt, pulled the pin with his teeth, and threw it ahead. Instantly, the trench filled with fog so dense it erased the world. Gunfire erupted again. Wild, desperate, directionless. The Russians were shooting at ghosts, but the Ukrainian had already vanished. He crawled along a collapsed section of trench, silent as the dead, moving behind them. When the first soldier turned, it was already too late. A single burst ended him. The last man spun, eyes wide with terror, firing blindly into the smoke. But panic makes poor aim. The Ukrainian's final shot was calm, steady, deliberate. The echo of that bullet carried farther than sound. It carried silence. The battlefield grew still again. Smoke drifted like ghosts over the bodies of the fallen. The Ukrainian lowered his weapon slowly, the trembling in his hands no longer from fear, but from the fading rush of battle. His chest heaved, his ears rang. 6 men had waited for him. None were left standing. For a long moment, he just breathed. The war stretched endlessly around him, an ocean of destruction, with no shore in sight. But in that tiny patch of earth, surrounded by the dead and the quiet, he had won. Or maybe not won, survived. He found a broken Russian radio half buried in mud, its casing cracked, the dial half frozen. He turned it slowly, listening to static until, finally, a voice cut through. "Alpha Team, do you copy?" He hesitated before answering, his voice low and steady. "This is Bravo 1. I'm alive. Sector secure." The reply came fast. "Hold position. Reinforcements en route." He leaned back against the trench wall and exhaled, eyes staring at the colorless sky. The adrenaline drained out of him, leaving only exhaustion. His ammunition was gone, his strength nearly spent, but he had done what seemed impossible. Hours later, when Ukrainian reinforcements arrived, they found him sitting quietly, rifle across his lap, surrounded by the remnants of the battle. The scene was almost unreal. 6 bodies, 1 survivor. The story spread quickly through radio channels and command posts. 1 soldier, 6 enemies. A fight against impossible odds. When journalists asked him later why he hadn't run, his answer was simple. "If I ran, they'd take the trench. And if they took it, they'd reach my friends." Those words rippled through military networks, across social media, and into homes far beyond the front. Soldiers repeated them like a mantra, a reminder of what war had become. Not about glory or banners, but about holding a single line when everything else falls apart. Military analysts reviewed drone footage, confirming what many thought impossible. One man had held off an ambush meant to destroy him, delaying a Russian advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive. His defiance turned what could have been a defeat into a turning point, a brief, bloody pause in an endless storm. But to the man himself, it didn't feel like heroism, it felt like survival. He didn't crave medals, recognition, or praise. He just carried the memory of that morning, the smoke, the cold, the echo of gunfire, fading into silence. War isn't just fought in massive offensives or sweeping victories. Sometimes it's fought in a single trench. Sometimes it's decided by one man who refuses to fall when everything tells him to. This was no myth, no propaganda, just a moment carved into history by a heartbeat that refused to stop. He walked away from that trench as the snow began to fall again, his boots sinking into the mud that had nearly swallowed him. Behind him, the field lay silent, broken trees, scorched ground, and the bodies of those who thought they'd win. In the distance, artillery boomed once more, shaking the horizon. The war hadn't paused for his story. It never does. But that morning, for a few fragile minutes, one man had changed the rhythm of the battlefield. And as the sun dipped behind the smoke, the wind carried away the last echo of his fight, a whisper of endurance carved into the silence. The battle was over, but the echoes refused to fade. Long after the gunfire stopped, the air still trembled with its memory. Smoke drifted lazily across the scarred earth, carrying the smell of iron and ash. The Ukrainian soldier sat in the trench, his hands trembling, the rifle resting lifeless across his lap. Around him lay the silence of victory, a silence that felt heavier than defeat. He closed his eyes and let the cold seep in. His body ached, every muscle screaming from exhaustion, but his mind was sharper than ever. He could still see it all, the muzzle flashes cutting through the fog, the sound of bullets whistling past, the look in the eyes of the last man he shot. Those faces would stay with him. They always did. When the reinforcements arrived, they didn't speak at first. They just stood there, staring at the scene in disbelief. 6 men down, 1 man alive. The ground itself seemed to tell the story. The broken helmets, the scattered casings, the frozen mud stained dark with the price of survival. One of the younger soldiers finally whispered, "How did you do this?" The veteran didn't answer. He simply looked up at the horizon, where gray smoke met gray sky. He wasn't thinking about how he did it. He was thinking about why he was still here when the others weren't. The commander called for medics, but he waved them off. "I'm fine," he said quietly, "just cold." He wasn't lying, but he wasn't fine either. Inside, something had changed. In war, victory never feels clean. It's never triumph. It's survival dressed as glory. That night, when the front fell silent again, he sat by a small fire with the others. They spoke softly, almost afraid to break the quiet. Then the radio crackled, command confirming what they already knew. His defense of the trench had delayed a Russian advance, long enough for reinforcements to secure a new line. 1 man, 6 enemies, 1 trench that refused to fall. For the soldiers listening, it became more than a report. It was a story, a fragment of hope in a war that had taken too much. But for him, it was just another day. He didn't die. Days turned into weeks. The snow melted into mud, and the mud turned back into ice. The war rolled on. The same soldier returned to the front line again and again, carrying with him not pride, but a strange kind of quiet. He fought because there was no one else to take his place. Yet, each time he walked past that trench, the same one that had nearly become his grave, he felt something, a pull, a whisper of ghosts. The ground still bore the marks of that morning, bullet holes, fragments of grenades, footprints half buried in frost. It was as if the earth itself remembered. He would stop for a moment, looking at the emptiness, and think of the 6 men who had waited for him, of their confidence, their fear, their final moments. War had stripped them of names, uniforms, sides. In the end, they were all just men, caught in a storm too big to escape. But deep inside him burned a quiet fire, a sense of duty, of unfinished business. That morning had proven something no metal could capture, that courage isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for cameras or recognition. It lives in silence, in the spaces between fear and action. The next missions blurred together. New ambushes, new near deaths, new scars, but none ever matched that first impossible morning. That day had changed him. It had taught him that survival isn't luck, it's choice. The choice to move when others freeze, to fight when surrender would be easier, to stand when everything inside you begs to fall. Months later, when he was finally rotated off the front, a journalist tracked him down in a field base near Kramatorsk. She wanted to tell his story, the 1 against 6, the impossible trench stand. He listened as she spoke, her voice bright with admiration. Then, quietly, he said, "I didn't win, I just didn't die." There was a long silence. Then he looked toward the horizon, the same gray sky stretching endlessly over a scarred land. "If I ran," he said, "they'd take the trench, and if they took it, they'd reach my friends. That's all there is to it." The interview aired days later, and his words spread farther than he could imagine. Soldiers repeated them across outposts, on radios, in whispers before dawn patrols. They weren't words of heroism, they were words of endurance. A reminder that even when the world collapses, 1 man can still hold the line. And so his name faded, but his story didn't. Somewhere on the Eastern Front, his trench still exists, buried in snow, marked by rusted metal and the memory of fire. Locals call it the Survivor's Trench. It stands as a symbol not of victory, but of resistance. War moves on, new battles rise, new heroes fall, but legends like his don't disappear. They linger in the silence between gunshots. This was not just a story of survival, it was a story of will, of 1 man who refused to fall when fate demanded it. In the end, it wasn't strength that saved him. It wasn't strategy. It was something deeper, the instinct to protect, the refusal to yield. And in that frozen trench, amid the smoke and blood, the world caught a glimpse of what courage truly means. Because sometimes, the line between life and death is drawn by a single heartbeat and 1 man's decision to keep it beating. This was the story of 1 soldier, 1 trench, 1 impossible fight, presented by Covert Frontlines. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even in the darkest corners of war, humanity still burns, then subscribe to Covert Frontlines. Here, history isn't just told, it's lived. One battle, one heartbeat, and one soldier at a time.